everyone, we wanted to give you a heads up on today's episode. We are talking about fasting primarily from food. And so if you have in your life had a relationship with food that's very unhealthy, eating disorder or something in that vein, we just want to encourage you, be free. You don't have to engage in this. And there is no condemnation in Christ. We want to just give you a heads up. This could be triggering and difficult. And so you don't have to go there. We just want you to be encouraged as a disciple to continue to connect with Jesus. Hey, and welcome to Let's Talk Practices podcast. We are here again, and I'm thrilled to be here with both my friends, Jen and Lindsay, and we are talking about fasting today, which I feel like doesn't always, we know it's a discipline, we know it's a practice, we don't always talk about it.
Yes.
So this time, we're talking practices.
I feel like there could be a few people that have already trying to decide if they're going to turn the podcast
They're
off.
like, I'm going to skip it entirely. We're not going to
hang
listen
in there.
to this.
Just hang in there. Let's hear what we got to say.
It really is going to be phenomenal. But really quick, Lindsay, just real quickly as we get started, tell people who you are.
So my name's Lindsay Tucker. I'm a member at Stonegate, and I have 2 little kids, and I'm a family nurse practitioner here in town. So.
Well, perfect. So in case we have any medical issues with fasting, we can bring those up, and you can clear us
consult your
officially.
doctor. No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This
perfect.
is not a medical podcast.
So, okay, fasting's already difficult. We know this. Let's stop here first. Let's make this first pit stop. Let's all share our experiences with fasting, good, bad, and ugly. Where are we coming from, background-wise and experience-wise? You want to go first, Jen?
Sure. I grew up in a church that was definitely a body of believers that was called to corporate fasting pretty regularly. And so I remember fasting as a young believer, typically in as a family and as a corporate body. Usually, it might be around the desire for revival or the desire for God to provide something for our building, or, there would be a pastoral call to that. And so the concept and the idea of fasting really has always felt very normative and comfortable. I would say in my later years of being a believer, maybe in my teens, 20s, 30s, I'm not sure how much I really did it from a spiritual standpoint. I think there was probably some, and always I'm sure there's a struggle of mixed desires of hoping to lose weight or get rid of bad cells, as they say, or detox your body. All while saying, and Lord, teach me something along the way. And so very mixed hopes and wanting different outcomes from my fasting. So I would say that's kind of the broad stroke of my journey. And then in these recent years, hopefully approaching it just a lot more, trying to approach it honest with the Lord, always unfortunately wanting the health benefits, but being aware enough to know that I can confess that to Him and kind of go back into, no, Lord, I first and foremost, I want to see you more clearly. I want to have whatever you have from this fast. So I've done everything from some rhythms of every Wednesday, I'm not going to eat lunch. I have done 40-hour fasts for a season. There was several years I was doing 40-hour fasts pretty regularly, almost monthly. So I'd go Sunday after I'd eat, and I wouldn't, I'd somewhere and break it between Wednesday night and Thursday morning. So, and that was typically liquid only. And so there's been different ones. And then, so that's probably my journey, just personal journey of fasting.
Okay. Lindsay, what about you?
So I grew up in a church that had Lent. It was something that we would practice, was Lent, very kind of conservative church. And so the idea of giving up has always been part of the Christian walk with me. That was very normal to think about giving up something. But in high school, my youth group really started challenging the giving up of food and really kind of looking at what is fasting, what does it mean? And my experiences were terrible. I hated it, actually. I slept most of the 3 days of my first ever fast because I was hungry and I didn't like it. So, but I did it, and I did it just because I was prideful and I wanted to tell people that I completed it. So, but over time, I actually started going overseas, engaging in overseas missions, actually to Muslims, where fasting is a big part of their culture. And so really talking through fasting and the differences in different religions of why and what the end goal is, like really became a beautiful discipline that I could begin to practice. And now today, even incorporating it into my kind of weekly rhythm of having a time where I've really begun to see fasting and prayer hand in hand, going together. So,
yeah. For me, I didn't grow up doing any kind of fasting or church. I'm not aware of our church fasting. I never did it. So fasting for me didn't come into my life. I think at one time in high school I fasted. It was probably to figure out where I was going to go to college. Like, God, tell me where I'm supposed to go.
I got a big decision.
So I got a big decision, so I need to fast and stop eating. But I'm almost certain that probably lasted about 10 hours. Yeah. And then I just didn't really do it until in my 20s. I felt like I really wanted to seek Jesus more in fasting and be connected with him. And it was like this. It was like when you're first in love and you're like, I don't even need food. I don't even need food. This is so good. And I did this extended fast, and it was glorious. I felt like I was knowing him. I was meeting him. And it tricked me because when I tried to fast again another time, it was brutal and it was not lovey-dovey in any way. And so I've just now in adulthood, different times, it was a weekend every few months or a day here and there. And so on and off of regular rhythms of fasting, and those experiences being both just an experience of physical difficulty. No angels were showing up in the room. It is just painful. And then also awesome, wonderful things and even subtle growth. So I've experienced all those things in fasting, but always worth it. But so you had mentioned it, Lindsay, it was natural for you to give up things. So for us in this podcast, when we say fasting, we mean something in particular. Yep. And what we do mean particular is not eating food. And Jen and you and I have had this conversation that the Bible means a very specific thing when it says fasting. Talk to us about that.
Well, when it's referenced in the Bible as the word fasting, it is only talking about abstaining from food. And so I think that we've got a lot of books out there. There's a lot of information out there of abstaining from other things, social media, TV watching, sugar, which is food, but like just more your cell phone, whatever it is. And although those are really great, and those can be very life-changing and show you like, oh, I use this for comfort or satisfaction, whatever it is. When we see verses in the Bible, Jesus is saying disciples are fasting. He is saying it is talking about food, and there is a power in the Spirit that when it comes to us giving up food and telling our bodies that no, this isn't what you have, that God is the true bread of life. And so I think that's important. Not that if you use the word, I'm going to fast from my cell phone use, you're misquoting the Bible. That's not really, we're not going to be that harsh about semantics here. But in our podcast, we're just going to make sure it's just clear that we're talking about food.
We're talking about fasting from food. Another thing we had mentioned is that you just said it, that we'll deal primarily with the New Testament, but in the New Testament, fasting is happening. And what's interesting about fasting is that fasting is assumed by Jesus. So Jesus, at one point, when the disciples can't cast out a demon, he tells them this kind only comes out by prayer and fasting. To betray of the disciples, you probably haven't been doing either one of those. And he was expecting that they would, and that power comes from those things. And then additionally, when Jesus' disciples are accused, they're accused of not fasting in that moment, they're feasting. He says that a day will come when the bridegroom is taken from them, and in that day they will fast. So Lindsay, talk to us a little bit about is fasting for the spiritual elite only?
No, I think just from what you have just said, it sounds to me like Jesus is intending all Christians to be engaging in that practice.
For all disciples
If you
to
follow
be
Jesus,
fasting.
Yeah. There's an invitation. And that's part of the language of talking about it, right? Like, it's not you go do this and here's this yoke on you, but there's an invitation to know him deeper and to know him, to grow in a fire in your soul.
And he's created the way.
Yes.
Like, we don't actually have, there's not like, how do I do that, Lord?
Yeah.
Fasting. Oh, okay. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Right.
that feels scary. That feels hard. Yes. We have made the way. I have made a way for you to connect with me.
Yeah. Lindsay, share with me, we have been talking in this podcast about how connection is like first, and as we practice, the goal is always connection. This is always to get us closer to knowing better, leaning on, more dependent on the person of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so talk to me about how you personally have experienced fasting and helping your connection with Jesus.
Yeah, I think for me, it is really evident because when you fast from food, you hunger. And that's, I think that is some of the distinction you guys are talking about. You can abstain from other things, right? Like you can withhold social media or all these things. But for myself, when I do that, I find that I can fill that time with something else really easily. And so there is not a pit in my stomach that draws me to a continual remembrance of my dependency, of my need, of my lack, of my my humanness, than fasting and turning to him to sustain me in my hunger and in my weakness. I think any discipline that exposes your own weakness and creates a place for you to then go to him in dependency is a good thing.
I love this. Fasting from food is chosen weakness. It's choosing weakness on purpose to depend on Jesus and seek him. I find sometimes even if I, you can be in a season that's not suffering, right? And you get a little antsy. You're like, maybe I should wait for the shoe to fall. But we feel weird that maybe I'm not suffering enough for God to be moving in my life. But fasting is actually a chosen suffering. It's a chosen weakness to forsake what's comfortable, what is easy, which is normal, eating food, and choosing weakness and asking God to move in that. Jen, how have you experienced your connection with Jesus being strengthened by fasting?
I think a lot with what Lindsay's saying, it's the physical feeling. I have such an interesting relationship with food. I think we all do if we really look at it. But I can only talk about me. And there is a weird fear to be hungry. Like, I don't know what that is. I've never needed for food. And I definitely turn to it for comfort and other things. And so to make a choice to not eat and to say, and then to live in that discomfort, it just is a really growing awareness of my weakness, that he's there. I probably a lot of my life heard like, you're hangry. And there was like, that's almost a statement of like who you are. And so then it created this fear of like, if I don't eat, I'm something that I don't want to be. And to see walking out fasting, and to see like that I can function, that I can have joy, that I can not react into my, like, be controlled by my stomach, has let me just give him more control, of my life. And a deep connection of just like, you're with me and like you've created me and you've that feels a little jumbled, but it has undone a lot of my relationships with food. When I feel those things starting to come up, I know it's time to fast. Like, it's time to like reorient. Like, I've lost, who my true source is, who my provider is, who my comfort is, who my satisfier is. Like, I'm off course.
Yeah. You saying that made me think of this. We can all say this. Is there ever, what are you thinking and how are you feeling when then you go, oh, it would be a good time to fast, because it's possible that people listening, maybe they haven't ever fasted, or they just feel disconnected with, why would I need to?
Mm-hmm.
So help us see what's going on in your mind and your heart, where it's like, you know what would be really good here? A fast.
Yeah. I think two things. One is if I'm feeling stuck, or I'm feeling like I'm needing a breakthrough, either personally or for somebody else. I can't say that like I for sure have seen fasting bring that breakthrough in my life, but I see that that's how the Lord teaches that it does. And so there is some trusting there. So there's, I've done it for those reasons. And I think probably more reasons of just like, I'm feeling that apathetic heart with the Lord. It's like, you know, and I don't necessarily I don't ever sign up and I'm excited to do it. Let's all be like real here. Well, nobody needs to be extra holy.
Yeah.
It is not something I'm excited to do, and the physical side effects and all this.
Yeah.
But I'm so grateful for that I've practiced it long enough that I know that my nearness to the Lord is coming. So the question was, what has made me want to do it? So sometimes it's just needing the breakthrough. And sometimes I just look back and it's like, I have not fasted in a while.
Yeah.
And knowing that it's a good thing that the Lord assumes I should be doing as a disciple of Jesus. And so sometimes I'm just doing that because it's probably from the Spirit going, by the way, you've not practiced this in a while. So
Yeah.
that feels kind of like a lame answer, but I think that's sometimes really why I do it.
Yeah, totally. Lindsay, what about you? What things are in your mind and your heart where you're like, yes, fasting would be good here? What's fasting here?
Well, I think there's a couple of times that I'm drawn into fasting. Sometimes it's actually from a friend. And I really appreciate living in community with people who practice fasting, because sometimes you're drawn into fasting when it's not on your radar.
Totally.
Because someone else is saying, hey, I feel like the Lord's calling me into this. Do you want to fast with me for the next couple of days, or, every Friday for the next month or something? And it may be something way out of left field, but then it's like this, again, an invitation from the Lord through a friend to engage in it. I think for me, a lot of times, if my life is just looking a lot like, if I'm not longing for heaven, I know that is a weird thing to say, but if I am so content here, if I have made my little heaven here to the extent that I am not recognizing that there's a king coming, and we should be praying and seeking for his coming, then something's not right in my spirit, and I need to align with him. And fasting does that. That's actually what he's telling the disciples. When I'm gone, and now you're longing for the return of the bridegroom, that's when you're fasting. And so when my life is not reflecting that homesickness anymore, I need to get to fasting.
Yeah. Why do you fast typically?
I'm usually two things that you guys have said. One is if I'm feeling stuck, apathetic, unresponsive, if I find that my natural thoughts and inclinations are not like, man, I'm just really excited about being with Jesus, I find that a next thought is fasting feels like a catalyst, because it takes off the veneer of like, I'm doing okay. Like fasting takes away, and we said it, like fasting takes away the ways that I prop myself up, even with food. I prop myself up with a lot, but it takes away the most immediate prop of I'm okay, everything's okay, and I think I'm really doing this thing right. And it immediately takes it away and exposes the real state of my soul, which is hungry, needy, very weak, not capable, leaning on a lot of other things, and brings me back to the reality of I am actually more dependent on God's word, on God's interaction with me, on his Spirit, than I am in need of this food right now. This is my reality. So brings me back to reality out of apathy, but also I have a natural desire to fast, which is totally God. When God is moving, and I do have a big appetite for him, when I want to meet with him, when I'm like, God, please move in my city, when I am focused on the things of his kingdom, when I want to see breakthrough with friends and in my neighborhood, feel naturally like, then it's time to get fasting. Then that's what's got to happen. I feel like over the last few years, God growing a big desire to be praying in community for revival and for our city and for myself and for a lot of things. And Lindsay has been a huge part of that too, just in our friendship. And wanting having a big desire for God to move, and then fasting coming out of the desire to see him move.
Yeah.
And that has been so encouraging that it definitely sharpens my focus. So whether in apathy or in really wanting to seek him genuinely, it sharpens my appetite for the things that are eternal.
Yeah.
That is like, this is actually what matters the most, more than anything else.
Yeah.
More than food. Food is good. But even more than that, this is what he's doing.
Yeah. Have you guys ever fasted and had something really surprising happen? Like whether it's something you've learned or like you're like, oh, didn't see that coming, and you're willing to maybe share it. That was an on the spot question. So
I have one that it didn't produce in me like a personal a personal revelation that was surprising. Like, oh wow, I didn't see that. But I did my husband and I were in youth ministry years ago. We did a 40-day fast with us and everyone who's a volunteer in youth, and we're asking for a breakthrough for these kids. And we did a liquid fast for 40 days. And at the end of that, at one of the services, there were several kids who all of a sudden, like the dam broke in the conviction of their sin. And so they came that night confessing, repenting. We didn't do the service different. It was just...
Yeah.
And then they were all confessing. And one girl in particular felt like she heard the Spirit speak to her something really significant. She had experienced abuse in her life. And she very profoundly and deeply heard God say, that was not your fault.
Aww.
And it really changed. It like changed some significant things. So it was like, the service was, everything was the same except the fasting.
Yeah.
So that felt profound. That was a huge shift.
Yeah. That's awesome. Did anything come to mind?
Yeah, I was just thinking on, what was it, maybe 2 or 3 years ago when our own church youth group went to a summer camp out at the beach. And there was a group of us who had been praying and fasting for the youth of our church. And, for a while we had been doing this. And they encountered the Lord there. And I remember they came back and they were saying, like, God just showed up. It's very similarly. God just showed up. And I think it was even Rodney from the stage was like, I don't know what was going on. But, people were getting saved. There was probably 40 baptisms when they came back. There was something more. And I just remember crying in the back of the church, like, God, you are faithful. And I felt like the prayers of the saints and the fasting and encountering God and meeting with him and just contending for these people. It was like, it was powerful. It was just powerful and a reminder. The only other thing I think about too, with like a really incredible moment with fasting, it's a 25-year fasting and prayer journey. But when I was 19, I remember walking around a park with a friend and fasting and praying for my sister, and never seeing fruit, never seeing fruit, and just going, well, at least I met him. At least I got to meet him. But I really believe that a big part of fasting, you're actually breaking off, like the yoke. It says this in Isaiah, you break off the yoke of bondage over people. There's things that are happening when you're meeting with the Lord and fasting and dependency on him.
Yeah.
And then just not seeing it. And then 25 years later, the Lord, as my sister's getting baptized at our church, the Lord reminding me, you fasted and prayed for that.
Yes.
And just saying it is not in vain. When I meet you and I empty myself out and you fill me, it is not in vain.
Yeah.
So good.
I think that with fasting, it's, you're welcoming suffering.
Yeah.
You're saying like, I'm going to be uncomfortable. I'm going to, my stomach's going to hurt. I might have a strange bowel movement. I might, I may get a weird acne. There's some things your body likes, my breath is bad. There's all these things. You're like, wow, fasting does a lot of weird things to our bodies. And as a doctor, she says it's fine.
Yeah.
But I know for me, the things that when I have said I'm signing up to suffer for the next 40 hours or one meal, there's just been surprising things and convictions and places for me to then confess that have surprised me over the years. I think for most of us, the Lord is calling. We are to bear a cross. Like life as a believer isn't supposed to be easy. And yet in Western, I think we can, unless you're just dealt a pretty hard card of something, it can be very comfortable. And I've had some seasons of comfortable, and what the place, the connection I have with Christ in a moment where I'm signing up and saying, I'm going to suffer for a few days, within his pain and his temptation in the garden. I mean, there's just these, it brings up these moments of, God, what sins am I doing that like are acceptable sins to the world, and yet I should be killing those, and I'm not. I mean, there's just so many places. So I think when we welcome ourselves into a suffering moment, we're welcoming that pain of our stomach. To me, I've just been really surprised at where I've connected and then seen like there's some other places that are acceptable sins to Western Christians that I need to kill those things also. And so that's been a surprising blessing of fasting.
Yeah. It's definitely a moment, it's a time of exposure that God totally uses in that weakness and in needing food, not having it, exposing, of course, the dependence itself on food, but then he uncovers a lot of other things maybe. I wonder if it probably is. I mean, I wonder too if in fasting you are, your awareness is heightened in a way already for what he's saying and what he would convict. I find when I live more fasted, I'm definitely more sensitive to God moving. What could he be saying? What could he be doing? And realizing things in myself like, oh man, that's there. Gosh, all of that. So for anyone listening who they're starting to get excited about fasting, maybe they want to try a foray into fasting. What are practical things that people can do to begin a practice of fasting for the sake of connecting with Jesus? What can people do?
I think you can start small.
Yep.
View any of these practices that we're talking about on these podcasts as less legalism and rules and more, the goal is connection.
Yeah.
And so start with one meal, maybe one meal a week. You just say, on Tuesdays at lunch, I'm going to, fast my lunch. And during that lunchtime, I'm going to make a plan, read the Bible during that hour. I'm going to prayer walk my office area or my neighborhood. So just exchange the food for time with the Lord, however you enjoy that, worshiping for that hour or whatever. So I start there as my first goal.
Yeah. I like that.
And then build. What's another way you could do it? Building from there.
Yeah, I think anytime I talk with people about how to engage in it, I always recommend starting with a single meal and then try a day, or even just while the sun is up. That's a really simple one. And then from there, you can always try 2 days or 3 days. And just see how you are engaging with the Lord in that process. I think a lot of it is a shifting of your mindset. It's not just withholding food, but now you're feasting on Him. And so it is just as much as making a plan of in those moments when you are hungry, what are you going to do? What scriptures are you going to go to? Where are you going to eat on Him and feast on Him? So
I find that I have experienced a really big difference between me just deciding to not eat and me actually fasting, which is the trade of I won't have food, but it's because I want Him who is going to sustain me and is even better. So if I'm not doing the trade, if I'm not exchanging that for a prayer, for real time with Him, then it just becomes an exercise in how long can I go not eating?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I have to consciously commit. I'm not going to get on a scale. I'm not it's just one step of like obedience of trying to get my heart to be fixed on not the health benefits of fasting. We're living in a society where everyone's saying intermittent fast, it's great for you. There is so many health. I think it's really cool that the Lord's like, a disciple of Christ should be fasting. He's assuming we're fasting. And medically it's showing us that it's actually very good for our bodies to have breaks from food and to get to detox. Those are all beautiful gifts in the midst of a spiritual gift that's happening. And yet, because we are so body focused as a society, Jennifer is body focused as a person, I have to try to orient my eyes, lift my eyes to Him and ask Him. So one of those ways is just to say, the scale is out of the picture
Yeah.
And I don't know what I start at, and I don't know what I finish at. Don't get on it. And community is I would say if you're starting, I think young I was confused, like I couldn't tell anybody.
Oh yeah.
You know, the scripture talks about don't tell anyone that you're fasting. And there's a misunderstanding of that scripture. I really enjoy doing it in community, whether that's a large group or one or two others, and having a text thread that is encouraging and being able to say, like, y'all, I've hit a wall. I'm really hungry, you know, and two other ladies getting to say, I'm praying for you right now, that the Lord would speak, and getting to share what God's showing us along the way. Those times where I've done it in community that way have been really, really a blessing. So I would just say, if you're starting, see if you can find a friend that would want to do it with you.
And if you're starting, I also would just say, there's really no failing in it.
Yes.
I think that's the other thing is, like, you can get real legalistic about, you know, disciplines. And I don't think it's about getting to the end of what you said. It's about him. It's about time with him. And so I know so many times I had 2 kids under 2, and I would be set out to fast, and 3 p.m. would roll around, and I would need a Starbucks, and I would load my children up knowing that I was failing, but I had spent the day with him, and that was okay. And I think sometimes we can get, like, the enemy will actually convince us of, like, failure in us actually spending time with the Lord. It's not failure, so try, and it's okay to fail forward into him, right? So,
And you can ask him, Lord, how long should I do this?
Absolutely.
You know, sometimes we make up our own rules. It's like, Lord's like, I didn't really ask you to do 72 hours. It's like, I didn't ask him. You know, I knew I could do what I needed to do in you in 24.
That's right.
So just taking the time to, like, sit before the Lord before you fast and to make a plan. What am I going to do in the spaces? And also, Lord, what does this fast to look like with you in this, how long and things like that. But I agree, man, that failure voice, it's done. Throw it out.
Yeah.
It's a bad guy.
Yep.
It's not worth it. Y'all, this has been lovely. This has been wonderful. I could even go longer, but we're going to wrap it up. So thank you for listening to Let's Talk Practices and talking about fasting. So in fasting, give it a try. Try a meal, try a day, phone a friend. Don't be afraid of failure. Just go for it. It's worth it to connect with Jesus. So anything else we didn't say about fasting?
We'll put some resources in the show notes if that's helpful for people and they want to deep dive into what is fasting. But I really encourage it to be a starting point. If you've never done it, jump. This is great.
Go for it.
Well,
that's it.
We're asking every guest.
Oh, yeah.
What is a practice? Lindsay's been on an
Fasting.
episode. I know. Well, I think that's so true. I actually walked in here a little convicted, like, I haven't done a fast in a while. And so I do think that is something that I'm going to look at my schedule in the next 2 weeks.
I'm already feeling like I should have already been fasted. It already feels like a little bit of, like, he's already been like, you remember, I've been saying. So I think appropriately, I really feel like, yes. I want to live at least a fasted life or fasted season or something with it. Way more intention. Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll get a group text going after.
Let's join a group text and do it.
We'll
There's so much to fast and pray for, so let's do it.
We'll do it in community. That's right. But all right. Well, we will see you on the next Let's Talk Practices.